The truth destroyed them, her deepest secret revealed. Today, we delve into a chilling story of betrayal and greed. Before we get started, don't forget to support this channel by subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss an update on our latest cases. They say, "Till death do us part," but sometimes death comes much sooner than expected. Love, once tender and pure, can rapidly morph into resentment, bitterness, and, in some instances, sheer hatred. When relationships hit their breaking point, the rational choice is to walk away, ideally in peace, but if that's not possible, at least not in violence. However, the allure of wealth can taint even the most sacred bonds, and when a fortune is at stake, some are willing to cross any line, including murder. This brings us to Gary Bentley's tragic story. His case isn't an isolated one. In fact, statistics show that around 40% of domestic homicides are fueled by financial dispute. For Gary, his life ended not due to an argument or accident, but because someone saw dollar signs at the expense of his existence. The person responsible? The woman he loved and trusted most. Was Gary aware of the danger he was in? His parents, Gerald and Lisa, suspected something terrible was coming. They noticed the warning signs and tried to shield their son from harm, but even they couldn't have imagined the lengths to which someone would go for $1 million payout. Gary couldn't fathom that the mother of his child, the woman he had built a life with, was plotting his demise. Gary desperately clung to his crumbling marriage, all for the sake of his young son. Tragically, his efforts were in vain. Gary ended up in a cold grave, leaving his son without a father, and despite the mother being alive, the boy became an emotional orphan. So, who was Gary Bentley before this dark chapter? Born on August 31st, 1984, in the quiet rural town of Louisville, Kentucky, Gary was the youngest of two children. His family owned and operated a small farm in Jefferson County, where they worked tirelessly to provide for their children, ensuring they grew up with strong values and a solid education. Gary and his older sister Amy were inseparable. Their bond was forged through years of farm life where hard work wasn't optional. It was a way of life. The Bentley family's farm may not have been large, but it was enough to teach both kids essential life skills, discipline, and responsibility. Gary, in particular, was close to his father. From an early age, he and his dad spent countless hours outdoors, bonding over fishing trips, hunting excursions, and camping adventures. Gerald imparted all his knowledge, from how to handle firearms to survival tactics in the wilderness. He even showed Gary how to find hidden treasures in nature, like wild mushrooms and berries. Little did they know, all these lessons in survival would never prepare Gary for the true danger that lay ahead, one that came from inside his own home. As Gary entered his teenage years, his interest in firearms grew into a full-fledged passion. Having learned how to safely handle guns from his father, he began building a personal collection. Nearly every weekend was spent outdoors, either hunting or fishing with his dad, solidifying their bond. They weren't just father and son, they were best friends. Gary embodied the essence of small-town life, a down-to-earth guy with a knack for fixing and building anything. His resourcefulness and practical skills earned him a reputation as the go-to handyman in the community. People who knew Gary described him as gentle and easygoing, always ready to lend a hand. He was dependable and avoided the typical pitfalls many teenagers encounter. No run-ins with the law, no bad habits, and he stayed clear of trouble. His focus remained on family and responsibility. Even as a teenager, Gary was known for putting his loved ones first, a trait that carried into adulthood. After high school, Gary headed to the state capital, Frankfort, to pursue a degree in engineering. During his college years, he remained dedicated and grounded, qualities that helped him land a good job right after graduation. He returned to his roots in Louisville, starting out as an electrician. Gary wasn't the kind of guy to settle, though. He quickly moved up in his career, proving his ambition and talent. It was during college that Gary met the woman who would change his life, Tasha. They were just over a year apart in age, but the difference was insignificant to them. Sparks flew quickly, and by 2006, the two were living together in a cozy home near Gary's parents. Tasha, like Gary, had big plans for her future. She was studying to become a nurse, and after earning her degree, she secured a job at one of the city's major hospitals. Her hard work and dedication didn't go unnoticed. Tasha gained the respect of her colleagues and quickly started advancing in her career. Unwilling to stop there, she pursued further education, continually climbing the professional ladder. In 2012, after years of dating, Gary and Tasha tied the knot in a grand wedding celebration surrounded by family and friends. Their happiness grew even more when, the following spring, they welcomed their son, Connor. Becoming parents was a dream come true for both of them. By the time Connor was born in 2013, their careers were in full swing. Gary's success in the electrical field, paired with Tasha's rising career in healthcare, meant they were financially comfortable. They moved into a spacious home, upgraded to 2 new cars, and enjoyed the perks of their hard work with vacations and a lifestyle free from financial stress. But Gary had even bigger dreams. He longed for a large family and often talked about wanting at least 2 more children with Tasha. To him, the perfect future involved a bustling home filled with love, laughter, and more kids to share it with. But the seemingly perfect facade of their marriage began to crumble just a few years later. What was Tasha hiding behind that cheerful exterior? For the first 4 years, Gary and Tasha seemed to be living the ideal life. They had everything going for them: great careers, a happy home, and a close-knit circle of friends. Their social life was vibrant as they regularly hosted gatherings for family and friends, offering warmth and support to anyone who needed it. To outsiders, they were the picture of stability and success. Gary's parents, Gerald and Lisa, adored Tasha and doted on their grandson. Everything seemed perfect until 2016, when cracks began to show in the Bentley household. The once solid relationship started to falter. It all began when Tasha started facing trouble at work, something that had never been an issue before. She frequently voiced her frustrations about her colleagues, her supervisor, and what she described as an increasingly toxic work environment. Gary, ever the supportive husband, listened patiently but cautioned her not to quit without a backup plan. After all, jobs with good salaries and benefits weren't easy to come by. In an attempt to escape the mounting tension, Gary suggested a vacation to help Tasha unwind. So, in the fall of 2016, the couple left their son in the care of Gary's parents and headed for a tropical getaway. They flew to Jamaica with their longtime friends, Annie and Kevin Day, hoping to find some much-needed relaxation and fun. The first few days were everything they'd hoped for: sunny beaches, island adventures, and time spent reconnecting with their closest friends. Yet, as the trip progressed, Tasha's mood grew increasingly distant. She seemed preoccupied, her attention frequently drawn to her phone, constantly texting someone. Anytime someone asked her who she was talking to, she became defensive and the conversations quickly turned tense. What was meant to be a stress-relieving vacation started to become a battleground. Gary and Tasha's disagreements, initially small and sporadic, quickly escalated into heated arguments that surprised even their friend. Annie and Kevin, uncomfortable with the rising tension, tried their best to mediate, but it only seemed to make things worse. One particular day on a yacht trip, things came to a head. After a sharp exchange between Gary and Tasha, the atmosphere grew tense. In an attempt to defuse the situation, Kevin made a lighthearted joke, hoping to ease the tension. But Gary, in a moment of frustration, lashed out, splashing beer in Kevin's face. The mood soured instantly, leaving everyone on edge. It became clear that the trip had not brought the peace Gary had hoped for. Instead, it only highlighted the growing distance between him and Tasha, leaving friends and family wondering what had really gone wrong. Kevin didn't hold a grudge over the incident. He knew that Gary's outburst wasn't really about the joke, but a result of the pressure and frustration building up around his marriage. Gary, feeling ashamed afterward, was quick to apologize and admitted he wasn't sure what had gotten into him. But the tension didn't end there. Shortly after returning from what was supposed to be a rejuvenating vacation, Tasha dropped another bombshell. She had quit her job. Gary was blindsided. He knew how much they depended on her income to sustain their lifestyle and support their growing family. With their finances now at risk, Gary tried to remain calm and rational. Thankfully, his diligent saving habits meant they had a financial cushion to keep them afloat temporarily. But still, he worried. Then, out of nowhere, Tasha announced she'd landed a new job just a day after quitting. She was hired as a consultant for a major pharmaceutical company. The timing was too convenient. Gary couldn't help but feel uneasy. She had never mentioned job hunting, let alone having an interview lined up. When he asked her about it, she waved it off, attributing it to good fortune and a random opportunity that she'd stumbled upon. Despite her promising new position, things didn't improve at home. Tasha was barely present anymore. She stopped cooking meals, neglected housework, and paid little attention to family matters. Her absence wasn't just physical, she was emotionally distant too. More troubling was her disregard for their young son, Connor, leaving most of the childcare to Gary's parents. On weekends, she often disappeared entirely, claiming she had business trips to attend, but her constant secrecy, especially around her phone, raised suspicions. She set up a password, something she'd never bothered with before, and always took her calls in private. Whenever Gary inquired, she brushed off his concerns, insisting it was work-related and that she needed to discuss confidential matters with colleagues. The more she tried to justify her behavior, the wider the gap between them grew. It wasn't just the long hours and frequent trips. Tasha was changing in other ways too. She had become guarded and withdrawn, the warmth she once radiated replaced by a cold detachment. Meanwhile, Gary was left to hold everything together. He took on most of the parenting, investing all his energy and love into their son. He made sure Connor felt cherished and supported, spending every spare moment with him. But as Gary juggled the role of a single parent, he still clung to hope. Despite Tasha's indifference and the constant strain, he loved her. He was determined to save their marriage, if only for their child's future. Gary's parents, sensing the growing tension between their son and Tasha, decided to step in. They surprised the family with a vacation to one of Mexico's most serene and picturesque resorts. The idea was to give Gary, Tasha, and their young son Connor a chance to relax and reconnect. Away from the stressors of everyday life, they chose a cozy, secluded hotel nestled in a quiet part of the country where the lack of cell service and spotty internet would encourage them to focus on each other rather than on their phones or work. At first, the plan seemed perfect. Without distractions, the family spent time together on the beach, went on long walks, and enjoyed each other's company. However, it wasn't long before Tasha's frustration with the lack of connectivity became apparent. She frequently wandered around the hotel, trying to find a signal to make phone calls or send messages. Her irritability grew, and she lashed out, first at Gary and eventually at his parents and even Connor. What should have been a peaceful family trip was quickly derailed by Tasha's increasingly volatile behavior. Gerald, Gary's father, found her actions concerning. After observing her mood swings and impatience, he pulled Gary aside for an honest conversation. Gerald expressed his suspicion that something deeper might be wrong, that Tasha could be having an affair. Gary tried to brush it off, making light of his father's concerns, but the look in his eyes told a different story. Gerald knew his son had likely been harboring similar suspicions but was too afraid to admit them. The tension escalated with each passing day. Arguments between Gary and Tasha became a daily occurrence, and soon Tasha demanded that they cut the trip short. She claimed urgent work matters required her to return home immediately. Despite having planned and paid for an extended stay, Tasha packed her bags and announced she would be flying back alone. Reluctantly, Gary and his parents ended the vacation early as well, forfeiting the remaining week at the resort without a refund. In the spring of 2017, another unsettling incident occurred. Tasha called Gerald in a state of panic, urgently asking for his help. She explained that her car had caught fire at a gas station and was completely destroyed. According to Tasha, the flames had engulfed the vehicle so quickly that it was reduced to a charred wreck before anyone could react. She needed help dealing with her insurance company and getting back home. Naturally, Gerald rushed to her side, but he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. In fact, this was the third vehicle Tasha had lost to a mysterious fire at a gas station. Each time, the car had been burned beyond recognition, leaving nothing but scrap metal behind, making it impossible to determine the cause of the blaze. Gerald couldn't help but wonder if there was more to these incidents than met the eye. Each time Tasha's cars mysteriously went up in flames, the incidents were chalked up to faulty gas station equipment. Despite the strange pattern, she always walked away with sizable insurance payouts. These fires seemed to follow a curious rhythm, happening every few years. Right before each fire, Tasha would switch insurance providers and max out the coverage on her vehicles. Claiming no knowledge of how the accidents occurred, friends and family speculated about the odd coincidence, with some suggesting she had enemies sabotaging her cars. But Tasha dismissed the theories, appearing as baffled as everyone else. Yet, after every fiery incident, Tasha would use the insurance money to purchase an even fancier, more expensive car. The insurance companies, with no concrete evidence of wrongdoing, couldn't legally deny her claims, even though the frequency of these accidents raised eyebrows. Proving any deliberate intent behind the fires was impossible, and Tasha continued to collect while the rumors quietly swirled. By the summer of 2017, Tasha's weekend disappearances became more frequent. She always claimed they were work-related trips, but the growing distance between her and Gary, as well as their son, was undeniable. She seemed to be living a separate life. Soon, whispers of infidelity spread through their close-knit community. Neighbors, friends, And even members of the Bentley family couldn't help but notice the changes in her behavior and began to suspect that Tasha was involved with someone else. These rumors devastated Gary. What he once laughed off as gossip or speculation now cut deep. He stopped making jokes about Tasha's absence and became withdrawn. Whenever someone brought up the possibility of an affair, Gary would quickly change the subject or stay silent, refusing to acknowledge the looming truth. Gary's parents, deeply concerned, tried multiple times to have a serious conversation with him. They urged him to face reality, that his marriage was crumbling right before his eyes, but Gary remained resolute. He loved Tasha and was determined to hold his family together, no matter how strained things had become. For the sake of their son, Connor, Gary clung to the hope that Tasha would eventually see reason and that they could rebuild what they had lost. In November 2017, the Bentleys gathered for Thanksgiving at Gary's parents' house. The holiday, usually a time for family warmth and celebration, was marred by tension. Gary's sister Amy attended with her family, and they all hoped that perhaps this gathering might help heal the rifts in Gary and Tasha's relationship. However, as everyone began exchanging gifts, it became clear that something was amiss. Tasha hadn't brought any gifts, not even for Connor. She offered a rushed apology, claiming she'd been too busy with work to pick anything up, and promised she'd step out to buy something. Hours passed, and when she finally returned, she was empty-handed, offering a flimsy excuse about the long lines in stores. It was the final straw for Amy. Frustrated and no longer able to hold her tongue, she pulled Gary aside for a private conversation. Amy bluntly asked her brother if he truly understood what was going on. Tasha wasn't even trying to hide her affair anymore. The signs were clear to everyone, but Gary was still desperately clinging to a vision of the life he once had, hoping that his wife would change. Gary's calm response to his sister Amy's concerns raised eyebrows, but he insisted they'd work through things privately. The following weekend, he called his father, Gerald, asking for a favor. Gary requested Gerald to bring over some tools to help him install something in the house. Within half an hour, Gerald arrived, eager to assist as he always had. Gary, known for his lifelong fascination with firearms, had amassed an impressive collection over the years. His house was practically a small armory, filled with everything from pistols to hunting rifles, and even a few rare finds. Despite his love for these weapons, he suddenly decided to gather them all up and secure them in a new gun safe in the bedroom. The abruptness of this decision struck Gerald as odd. Concerned, Gerald asked Gary why he was taking such a drastic step now. Gary's response was vague, offering no real explanation. It was clear to Gerald that something was weighing heavily on his son's mind, and it wasn't just about protecting his home from potential burglars. When Tasha came home later that evening, she claimed that it had been her idea. She admitted feeling uneasy, as if they were in danger, and insisted that locking up the guns made her feel safer. The remark struck Gerald as strange, but he didn't push further. In the days that followed, an eerie tension settled over the household. Gary's sudden preoccupation with safety seemed to hint at something deeper, but no one could have predicted the tragedy that would soon unfold. On Sunday, December 10th, 2017, Tasha frantically called Gerald. She explained that she hadn't been able to reach Gary all day. When she returned home, she found the garage door ajar and feared something terrible had happened. Too scared to enter the house herself, she asked Gerald to come over right away. Their son Connor was thankfully staying with his grandparents, leaving Gary alone in the house. Wasting no time, Gerald rushed over, his mind racing with fear and uncertainty. Upon arriving, the scene didn't immediately suggest any foul play. The garage door was indeed partially open, but nothing seemed disturbed. Inside the house, everything appeared in order. No signs of a struggle, no items missing, and nothing obviously wrong. But the silence in the house was unsettling. Calling out to Gary multiple times with no response, Gerald made his way to the bedroom. That's when he found his worst nightmare. Gary lay motionless on the bed. His skin was cold to the touch, his body already showing signs of rigor mortis. Overwhelmed with shock, Gerald attempted CPR in a desperate bid to revive his son, but it was far too late. With trembling hands, he dialed 911, unable to comprehend that his son was truly gone. As investigators arrived and began their work, the initial observations suggested nothing out of the ordinary. No forced entry, no visible threats. It wasn't until later that Gerald made another chilling discovery. The gun safe that Gary had installed just days earlier had been pried open. Several of his firearms were missing. The pieces of the puzzle didn't add up. Was this a simple burglary gone wrong? Or was there something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface? When the forensic team arrived on the scene, they discovered that Gary had died from a single gunshot wound to the head, fired at close range. His body was found in a natural sleeping position, lying on his side. There were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds, suggesting that Gary had likely been asleep when the fatal shot was fired, unaware of the danger creeping toward him. Interestingly, the crime didn't resemble a typical robbery. Expensive valuables, including a jewelry box and cash, were left untouched, sitting out in the open. This pointed investigators in a new direction, indicating that the gun safe had been the true target. However, only a few guns were taken, none of which held significant monetary value, and strangely, none of the firearms, including the ones left behind, matched the caliber used in the murder. From the very beginning of the investigation, suspicion fell heavily on Gary's wife, Tasha. Her behavior didn't align with that of a grieving widow. She seemed unnervingly calm, cooperating with detectives and recounting the events of the day without emotion. This lack of visible grief raised eyebrows, but it was only the start. Friends and family were quick to inform the police that Gary and Tasha's marriage had been strained for some time and that they were on the verge of divorce. Another strange detail involved the Bentley family's two large dogs, known to bark aggressively at anyone unfamiliar. Yet, none of the neighbors had heard any barking on the day of the murder. Given the layout of the house and the dog's temperament, the lack of barking suggested that the person who approached Gary was likely someone the dogs were comfortable with, probably a family member or close friend. Tasha told police that Gary had planned to go hunting that day. She claimed she had left the house to run errands and tried to call him around lunchtime but couldn't get through. Assuming he was out of cell range, she wasn't worried. On her way back home, she said she stopped by a friend's house, and her friend confirmed this when questioned. However, no one witnessed anything unusual, and none of the neighbors had seen any strangers or suspicious vehicles around the neighborhood. Surveillance cameras in the area didn't capture any useful footage either. The murder appeared calculated, and while the scene was set up to look like a botched robbery, nothing seemed to back up that narrative. One of the most shocking developments in the case came when Tasha received a phone call from her friend Annie Day. Annie, like many others, reached out to offer condolences and ask how she could assist with the funeral. Tasha's response, however, left Annie speechless. Rather than expressing gratitude or discussing the funeral plans, Tasha coldly stated that Gary's parents would handle everything as she had more important things to take care of. This cryptic reply deepened suspicions, especially when it was revealed that Gary had recently taken out a hefty life insurance policy valued at $1 million. Detectives now had a clear motive to consider. Had Tasha staged the murder to claim the insurance money and escape from a deteriorating marriage? Tasha's more important things turned out to be a visit to the insurance company to claim a sizable payout. Not long before Gary's murder, Tasha had persuaded him to take out a hefty life insurance policy worth $1 million. While Gary was initially reluctant, he eventually agreed, hoping to keep the peace in their rocky marriage. Just days before the tragedy, Tasha even attempted to increase the policy to $2 million, though her request was denied. With this new information, a motive was becoming clearer. Tasha stood to gain financially from Gary's death, just as she had profited from the suspicious car fires over the years. Investigators also unearthed the pattern of insurance fraud linked to the destruction of her cars, raising further doubts about her innocence. In a surprising twist, one of Tasha's close friends revealed that she had been romantically involved with a coworker named Anthony for more than a year. Anthony, it seemed, had even helped Tasha secure her new job. Police began to consider the possibility that he had played a role in the murder, potentially assisting Tasha in carrying out her plan. When questioned, Anthony didn't hide his affair with Tasha, admitting that they'd been seeing each other for a while and had plans to celebrate New Year's Eve 2018 together. According to him, Tasha had been planning to leave Gary soon. However, sensing that he might be a prime suspect in the murder, Anthony quickly offered an alibi, explaining that he had been at his parents' home on the day of Gary's death, helping them with house renovations. Surveillance footage from various thrift stores they visited during the day backed up his story. With Anthony seemingly cleared, detectives began to focus more intensely on Tasha. The lack of a forced entry and the dog's silence further supported the theory that Tasha had acted alone, meaning Gary likely never saw the betrayal coming. However, the murder weapon remained missing, along with several of the firearms from Gary's gun safe. Throughout her interrogation, Tasha's version of events shifted multiple times. She kept introducing new details, some of which directly contradicted her earlier statements. At one point, she even tried to implicate Kevin Day, the friend Gary had splashed with beer during their Jamaican vacation, suggesting that Kevin might have harbored a grudge and used the opportunity to get revenge. But as the questioning wore on, Tasha's resolve began to crumble. She became increasingly flustered, and after several hours, she finally broke down and confessed to the crime. Tasha ultimately confessed to killing Gary, but she attempted to shift the blame onto him. She alleged that he was abusive toward both her and their son, claiming that on the day of the murder, he had struck their child once again. She insisted this was the final straw, prompting her to wait until Gary fell asleep before retrieving a firearm. However, Tasha's accusations were met with skepticism. Friends and family members universally defended Gary, painting him as a devoted and affectionate husband and father who would never harm either of them. They attested to his gentle nature, emphasizing that he adored their son and would never lay a hand on him or Tasha. Even their son corroborated this, stating unequivocally that his father had never hurt him or his mother. In the course of the investigation, Tasha eventually disclosed the location of the firearm she had taken from the safe, including the gun used in the murder. Curiously, it bore Anthony's fingerprints, revealing that Tasha had given the firearm to him for safekeeping, which led to his prints being found on the weapon. Tasha had initially planned to frame Anthony if her scheme unraveled, but she confessed before she could execute that part of her plot. The trial for Gary's murder commenced in June 2021. The prosecution argued that Tasha's primary motive was financial gain. She aimed to collect the $1 million insurance payout, intending to use a portion of that money to renovate Anthony's house, where she planned to move once the divorce from Gary was finalized. On July 20th, 2021, Tasha Bentley was convicted of premeditated murder, and for attempting to mislead law enforcement, she was sentenced to 55 years in prison with the possibility of parole not before 2037. As for little Connor, who tragically lost both his parents in such a short span of time, he is now being raised by his paternal grandparents. This harrowing crime was featured in an episode of Investigation Discovery titled American Monster.